Hey, hello together. Um, Welcome to our talk about site performance at Mister Spex and the lessons we have learned in the past since we started at Mister Spex to have the site performance as one of our strategic KPIs. First of all, we want to introduce ourselves, who we are, what we are doing, and what we are doing at Mister Spex, and how you can get in contact with us. So my name is Sascha Kohlmann. I'm team lead at Mister Spex in one of these three storefront teams. I have now over 30 years experience in software development, starting in the 80s, telling from war. With a VIC-20, and now I'm doing since 20 years Java and a little bit R.
My name is Matthias Klebe. I'm software engineer at Mister Spex. I'm a passionate coder. I love as well running and cooking. If you want to reach me, you can reach me at Twitter at Klebema, or the casual stuff like LinkedIn or Xing.
So why we are doing site performance, or why it has such a big impact for Mister Spex and also for other site. So first of all, you know, most of us know the KPIs like bounce rate, revenue, conversion rate. And all these KPIs are influenced by the site performance. It's one of the things which influence the site performance. And when you are going to the internet and do a little bit of research, you find there some data. Some people say, okay, Google says 7% site conversion rate improvement when you are 1 second faster. DoubleClick say, okay, you lose 30 or 50% of your mobile users when you are slower 3 seconds. Amazon lost 1% revenue per 100 milliseconds, lose in site speed, and so on. Luckily, at Mister Spex, we have in 2017 the release of iOS 11. iOS 11 comes with a new filter for the Safari browser, which removes third-party tracking and pixel tools. And one of these pixel tools we had at have at Mister Spex, it's from Criteo. And Criteo generates or brings a banner to the Mister Spex site over the whole screen on the mobile devices and say, yes, we are from Criteo. We want to track you also in the future, but it's problematic with iOS. So please click here. You are now going to the Criteo site, and we will redirect you to the Mister Spex site so that we can track you again also in the future. Our marketing was not so amused, and they removed the Criteo tracking for Mister Spex on Safari, for Safari on iOS, in the same month, a few days later. And what we see here is that we in this moment have a drop or an increase of our site performance by 2.5 seconds, roundabout, for the pages or for the categories where we measure it. And this brings, only for the iOS environment, a conversion rate improvement by 9%, which is a lot for such a small company like Mister Spex. First lesson here we learned is, learn from others, but make your own experience. And after this, we say, okay, we must make this more transparent to the company. And we defined indicators to make this transparent with our performance indicators. And Mister Spex is a data-driven company, which is one of our working basements. We are customer-centric. I hope most e-commerce companies are customer-centric. And when we come to this, we prove, are the data we are collecting, is this customer-driven? And our first measure was, we measure only in the part the server response time. So we are running an Intershop Commerce Suite server, which is incredibly fast, delivers normally every page in every category in 150 to 200 milliseconds, which is fast. And we always thought, wow, we are fast. But is the server response time really a good measure? And no, it takes out, no, it's not a good measure because it's only measuring the hardware and the environment of our provider. So it's not customer-centric. So it's a real bad idea to measure the server response time. That was one of the lessons we have. Then second approach was, okay, what can we do to get better performance indicators? And when you have a look to the internet, again, do a little bit research, see some talks on YouTube, read a lot, and they're coming up with the time to first byte. This is the time between your request and when it's delivered, the content to your client environment system, like the browser or whatever it is. This is the line here in the bottom. You see the blue line. It's again, when you have the network latency in between the network, it's between 400 and 500 milliseconds until the first byte comes to the client. The transfer of the data is not a huge thing. It's normally about 5 seconds, so we don't measure it here. And then you have the DOM content loaded, and this is the upper graph. Here, it's somewhere around 10 seconds, and that's a lot. But it only shows you also an engineering data point. So it doesn't make any sense also to our customer. So it's also an engineering-centric data. And as such, it's also a real bad idea. So second lessons we have learned at Mister Spex is engineering-oriented KPIs doesn't reflect the real customer world. And what we need to know is how do we feel at the customer side. And for this, Matthias can give you now some insights to what we are using.
We are choose a customer-centric KPI because a human buys our products, not a computer, mostly. And so the human doesn't care whether the page is completely loaded, whether the footer is completely loaded and stuff. So we choose a speed index or perceptual page speed index. This is a indicator who tries to calculate how quick the page feels for the user. And therefore it takes images or in a film strip to see the visual progress, how the page is rendered. And it compares over the whole time the progress and generates a graph out of it. So our lesson we learned is define your KPIs carefully. And one of the really important parts of the perceptual page speed index is the critical rendering path. You can optimize your page on this, or you can't. In the top, we have an optimized page for this. It prints all the information the browser gets immediately to the user and gives the user so very, very fast feedback how the progress of the page is. The other, in the bottom, fetches all the information it has and renders it at once. At the bottom, the page is complete, 100% complete earlier than the optimized one, but the optimized one feels like it's faster because the user gets earlier feedback on this. And the page speed index is this tiny area over here because the user gets very early feedback and it doesn't change. The area is quite small. On the other, here the page is finished and it's printed, so the whole rating area here is way bigger. And we used it on our product listing page. This example is on desktop, and for us the start of the rendering process starts at 1.5 seconds and is finished, after 3.6 seconds. But this whole process has steps inside. The first step is the time to first byte. This is the time, the whole round trip time, and the time where the document reaches the client. This is something you can influence and you cannot influence. You as a developer can influence, for example, the application runtime or the database requests, but what you can't control is the round trip time of the user and the user's device. So you can control it and you can't. The next thing is the time to start render. The time to start render is the whole time from the user requests the page and the browser has all information, all external sources he needs to compile the DOM and the CSS OM. This thing is called the critical rendering path. It's a number of all the external scripts or files beyond the initial document. This is as well something you can control and you cannot. You can control it by just loading not that much external files. But as well, you cannot control the latency of the providers of the external scripts. For example, when you have tracking scripts or whatever. And the next event and the last event is 100% visually complete. In our case, it's 3.6 seconds. Then the page is complete finished. This includes as well images. In the sum, we have the time to first byte. This has quite little influence on the whole page speed index. And we have the time from start render and 100% visually complete. And the part with the most impact on the whole speed index is, in our case, the critical rendering path. So it's economically most reasonable to attack this step. So our fourth lesson is identify where the optimizations are worthwhile.
Okay. Then, when you have defined these ideas, when you have defined your KPIs, it's how to measure it. The speed index is not so easy to measure because it's influenced by a lot of external resources you are loading to your website. So best is here to have a synthetic or complete synthetic tests. And we are using for this an external tool because we don't want to go into the detail to develop all this on our own side. We have other things to do, maybe to optimize or better to optimize the page speed. So we buy here something from a third party vendor, and it's a Chrome-based tool. So it uses a real browser to download or to request the site, to build up the site. It's possible to have a full throttled download here, which means I can define my primary hardware, which I want to test my environment. For example, for Mister Spex, we checked the most used mobile device in 2017, and it's an Apple iPhone 6. When you have an Android, or when you want to do it with an Android, one of the best mobile devices here to test it is the Moto G4. These are common devices. And the other thing is what we can do here is, with a full synthetic test, we don't have any caching. This means for every page we are loading or which we are measuring, Speed Curve will clear all caches for it. This means not only the content cache, but also the DNS cache, which can have, when you have a lot of sites, a huge impact to your site performance. The second is what you can throttle here is the network. So for mobile devices, we assume also that you're surfing or that you're joining Mister Spex site with a mobile network. And the we don't know exactly currently what network the customer is using. This is possible to measure. There are APIs in the browser implemented, especially for mobile Android browsers, but we don't know exactly currently what it is. But we assume, and we have meetings with Google engineers, which tell us, yeah, currently it's a 3G, a slow 3G network with a, for example, latency of 300 milliseconds. And this will be the most important mobile network for Germany or maybe Europe in the next 2 to 4 years. A complete other thing is the desktop environment. There, we don't know what our customers have. We can only assume it a little bit. And this is the reason is why we first take care of the mobile side, not only because we have better insights there, but also it makes the most traffic on our site, from around 60% of the requests. So the lesson learned here, first of all, is engineer hardware doesn't reflect the real world. Oh, that's a complete different thing. When I started at Mister Spex, I get a fresh new Mac there. Okay, now it's a little bit older, 3 years old now. But new colleagues like David there, here's a complete new Mac. And it's a fast machine. But this is not what the normal customers out there have. So don't assume that your hardware, your developing hardware, is that what your customers out there have also. Third-party tools. You all have third-party tools on your website. Tracking pixel, content delivery networks, chatbots, chats, searches, recommenders, thousands of different things. And in December last year, we get a lot of calls to our on our call center that our site is slow. We are looking into our site. We can't see any problems there. But thanks to the speed curve measuring, we can have deeper insight of what the customer may see. And here is one of these pixels. It's loaded in, it's blocked, so it's loading in a blocked mode. Needs roundabout 20 seconds to deliver this pixel. And because it's blocking, what Matthias say, it's in this critical rendering path, we had a huge problem there. So our page is loaded in 20 or more than 20 seconds on the customer side on a desktop system. And that's real problematic. So what we learned from this is check every day the speed of your third-party pixels. Thanks to the HRR file, which the Chrome generates, and we can get from SpeedCurve, we see here a graph or a stack of the third-party pixels or third-party tools we have at Mister Spex. Sometimes we don't know what happens there. So CloudFront, you see it here. Both of these CloudFronts are in the same, are in Frankfurt. Both are, one is fast, one is slow. We don't know why this happens. But the lessons here is monitor your third-party vendors. Always, there's no excuse to not do it because they can destroy the whole user experience of your site. The second is, or the seventh lessons learned is that a website sites are complex and not only complicated. So, for example, a machine can be very complicated, but you have a plan to build it up. Our climate is a complex thing. So it's impossible to make predictions how the climate may be changed in the next century. We assume we have models there, and the same is in the small thing is your site. It's a complex thing. You can't really say what happens there when you don't monitor it. Matthias.
And to improve the page performance, we need to, we have the problem, every work we put into this would challenge a new feature. So we have the problem, we need to have a process how to fix this. So we took the page performance as a part of the as a service level agreement. We defined an average and an upper limit and a lower limit. And every time we see that our performance is out of these area, we have we violate the SLA and have to make a bug out of it. So we have to fix it. It's not something we have to fight against other features. We have to do this because the page is slow. And this is how we made it possible for breaks, but we want to improve the whole process. So we defined, said, okay, every X month, in our case, it was 3 months, we change the upper and lower limit so that we can have a process of getting a faster page. But in general, don't expect a big bang. The whole thing is a process. And it's nothing you can say, oh, I'm starting now, and in 1 year I have a really, really fast site, everything's done. Nope, it's a process. You have to feel it. You have to put it in the whole company. It's not only a IT thing or a marketing thing or anything. It's a whole company thing. That's our 8 lessons. And this is our summary of the lessons we learned. Are there any questions?
So we are a little bit faster than expected, so please, questions.
So did you connect your speed curve data or the speed index via ATL to your data warehousing to get the data also on session level for each user?
No, not yet.
Okay.
This is then also more real-time user monitoring domain, which is at the end a huge data fight. And we've currently take care more on the synthetic side because we assume that brings more impact.
Hi.
Yeah.
I saw that you have a mobile page and then a normal page, I guess.
Yeah.
So how do you combine the metrics for those two, and what is the motivation to have a mobile page?
So first of all, these they are complete independent. So we only measure, or we measure it for every category page or dedicated category page by its own, and divided also by mobile and by desktop. The reason why it's there, it's an historical thing. Nevertheless, I'm now happy that we don't have a page or an environment where we have both in one page, so a responsive side, because we can optimize much better for some of our high complex pages, like our glass option page, where you can choose the glasses for your prescription glasses. And to create this in a responsive way is very, very tricky.
But so when the critical path, when you want to optimize it, then you do it separately for mobile and for desktop?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Hi. How many data points per day do you collect via speed curve? Just every 4 hours or so?
We measure at prime time, so at 12 o'clock and 8 o'clock in the evening.
And that's sufficient?
Yes, that's it's enough. Because we know they're the highest load on our servers, so we are also running tests against the network only, so that we see that is there a problem with the network itself, but that's complete enough.
Different question.
Yes, for sure.
What about approaches like AMP? Have you looked into these?
You mean A/B test?
No, this Google initiative where this
AMP.
AMP.
Yes, yes. Google We are in strong contact with Google, also about page performance, because we know in July Google will roll out a new algorithm, and they say maybe Mister Spex is a little bit slow. We will rank you down. So, and they want to sell us this AMP thing. But in the company, there's an opposition to it, and I don't think that we will do it.
What are some of the performance bottlenecks that you've experienced? Like, for example, you mentioned third-party APIs that are there, but are there other typical examples that you come across when you're measuring the matrix?
I don't understand. Can you please repeat?
My question is that what are some of the typical performance bottlenecks that you encountered? For example, you mentioned third-party APIs. Are there any other typical scenarios?
Yeah. Critical points are, for example, huge images. We always think huge images are not critical, but they are. We trained here also our graphics department to reduce the size there. Other critical points are, for example, for sure, the blocking scripts and CSS files, and we try to reduce it more and more. Or do, for example, inlining scripts and inlining the critical CSS part.
Are you able to measure them with the performance matrix that you showed, or
Yes.
there are some other matrix that help you identify these?
This is our main KPI we currently have.
Okay, thank you.
So you mentioned this performance measuring tool. I just forgot the name, SpeedCurve or so.
Yeah.
So what made you choose using SpeedCurve instead of using the NPM package Lighthouse and simply deploying it somewhere? Is it the ease of use of a dashboard, or what was the reason? Because I see
it was
one thing costs money, the other doesn't.
The money. So the money we pay for SpeedCurve is currently, I think, it's my boss who pays the fee. It's 70 euros per month.
Okay.
So one developer hour to implement it is much more expensive, and yes, there are tools to use it, but we can be sure that we don't need to invest time or to improve this. We can not only have the speed index measuring, but also one of the others huge user-centric KPIs is the time to first interactive, and this is what they deliver us also for free, and we don't need to implement it by ourselves. The other thing is I don't need to care about cleaning the cache, cleaning the DNS. I don't know if it's possible with NPM to clean also the DNS cache. I have a defined environment where my service is running, which is normally always, it's very stable. So we see it in the graphs. We measure it now since 9-10 months. And from this time, we never have any impacts with SpeedCurve in case of the performance of the service.
Thank you.
Additionally to that, we started with the SpeedCurve in the mid of last year, and Lighthouse started end of last year, something. And we tried to implement it in our building process, that we may have in the build process building breaking criteria, but this is quite experimental right now.
Hi. You talked about user-centric metrics, and yet you use synthetic measurements. So, isn't it a little bit of a fraud, because you have to measure real user performance to get a picture of what your users really experience the page? And are there plans to use real user data for your measurements in the future?
Yes, there's a plan to roll out also real-time user monitoring. Nevertheless, it needs a little bit preparation. We need to measure what is really important for us. So it doesn't make sense that I get then the information, okay, it takes now, because on the real user monitoring, I don't have a speed index. I need to have different KPIs. For example, I need there the time to first interact. So when does the user first time taps on the screen, or use the keyboard, or use clicks with his mouse, or whatever. So we have not yet defined these KPIs. To bring it to the site is an easy task, but doesn't make currently sense to us.
Yeah, especially when you're using SpeedCurve, because SpeedCurve, I think it's a great product because you can have integrated user monitoring, real user data, and you can do your synthetic tests as well, and you can compare them. So
yeah, we know.
So
it's not so that we.
Yeah, that's the question. That's why I asked the question, because I think real user monitoring, it's a little bit more expensive to use the product then, but you get a better picture of what your user really experienced your page. So
that's correct. Yeah. Nevertheless, at this time we don't have it, because at this time we don't need it, or we are currently in a very strong learning curve, and maybe mid of this year we can roll out this.
Yeah. I think it's the way to go to start somewhere. So yeah, your approach is quite legible. So.
To go on with that question, would you combine the real user monitoring with eye tracking, or would you just use?
With eye tracking?
Yeah.
Oh, then we need to
just
switch on the camera. What we are doing is, like a lot of companies, we are using in some cases Hotjar. And our UX team measures this. But there's no plan to use eye tracking or something like that.
Okay.
No further questions. Then thank you for your attention. And guten Appetit.